Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Rick Stone. I'm a professional engineer. I spent about 20 years designing buildings, and then a concrete contractor made me an offer that I couldn't refuse. In other words, they threw enough money at me that I jumped the fence and became an employee of a concrete construction company. It's Madison Concrete Construction in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We've been everything from a $240 million a year company to a $20 million company, and sometimes the timing between those 2 points was only 2 years. So we've been up, we've been down. So today I'm here to fill in some of the blanks here in their session in who's responsible in concrete cracks. And again, we're ACI Committee 132, Responsibility in Concrete Construction, and we have a report. And by a show of hands, I'd like to know how many people have actually looked into that report and looked at the words on the page. Anybody? I only see a few hands. It's a good reference, and within the domain of ACI, there's many, many good references that everybody should be taking advantage of. But I have a special attachment to this one because I think it does have some very good information in it. So what I'm going to talk about today is from the contractor's point of view, in the contractor's execution, what happens when things change, specifically with regard to responsibility. So you've heard this before. It's a fact of life. Concrete's going to crack at some point. And there's a triangle, fast, cheap, and pretty. You can have any two of these threes. And then under the term pretty, you could maybe put in very, very carbon responsible, very pretty, or a lot of attention paid to controlling cracks. So that triangle is very important to remember throughout this entire process because you heard Frank talk about it, you heard Cal talk about it, that there's no such thing as a free lunch in the concrete industry. And again, there's the three legs of the stool that Calvin was talking about. There's a triangle of what's achievable. So let's take a scenario, and this is somewhat based in real life. Concrete contractor, construction manager get together because there's a potential that there's a project out there that they have been asked to provide a proposal for, and the construction manager says, hey, I don't think this owner cares one thing about cracking. He doesn't care if it's pretty. He just wants the best bargain that his money will buy. So they sit down and start to develop a budget and a schedule because the two of them, they go hand in hand because the longer it takes to build a building, the more expensive it's going to be. And pretty simple building. It's just a box, for goodness sake. It's almost 400 feet by about 124 feet. That's about as simple as it gets, right? So concrete contractor says, here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to use one set of forms. I'm going to pour 40 feet a day. I'm going to put the reinforcing in, pack the form up, pour it at 2 o'clock every day. I'm going to come in at 6:30 the next morning. I'm going to strip the forms, and we're going to do the same thing over and over again. Yeah, how many pours is that going to be? 26 pours, maybe a few days up front, in the back to load in and load out. Hey, we're done in 6 weeks. That sounds pretty good because that's a lot of linear footage of wall. So if we start in April with the foundations, we could probably start the walls in May. We're done by Flag Day. And the CM just absolutely thinks this is the best news that he's ever heard. He loves it. He loves the price. And so he says, this is what we really want to do. So the owner's very pleased at this bargain of a price. It kind of, it literally is the best deal he's ever seen. Now he goes to his A&E team, his licensed design professionals, and they start developing a set of documents. And again, as it flows from schematic to design development, now they have some drawings. There's some plans and specifications. And the owner directs it passed on to the construction manager so we can get a reality check on the pricing. And these documents are starting to include things like sections and details, more information than a schematic design. And the important thing here is the licensed design professional applied their standard details and their toolkit, their specification language, that they've developed as standard practice. That's what they're comfortable with. And it's important because maybe it's a project in their backyard, they're very familiar with the market, they know what they can do. Or it might be a project that's not in their wheelhouse. It might be 5 states away, and they have no idea what the standards are in that market. So it would seem that the licensed design professional read the responsibility in concrete construction document, which has a pretty cool statement here. And we're talking about responsibility, right? So I'm not going to read it for you, but the key words are, so as to meet the owner's final design criteria. You heard Frank talk about it. You heard Calvin talk about it. Making sure that the owner, you're serving the owner to the extent necessary. And if the licensed design professional does specify means and methods, techniques, sequence, procedures, then the design professional has a little bit of responsibility for the outcome, right? That's what it says. If the owner has a concern for aesthetics or cracking or serviceability, whatever that may involve, the licensed design professional will include those measures with which they are familiar. And they put them in these documents, and they've included in their judgment for crack control. And we're talking walls only here, by the way. You saw some pictures from Frank and from Cal that talked about slabs and other things, mass concrete, but we're just going to talk about walls because it's really easy, and it kind of narrows the field as to what could possibly be a cause. So they're going to include the measures that they have found to reduce the potential for cracking, not stop the cracking, control the cracking, reduce the potential for uncontrolled cracking. They're familiar with the ACI specifications and practice guides. They have some tribal knowledge of their market or of the market that it's in. And they issue some documents. So the construction manager, concrete contractor, get a look at the drawings and, all of a sudden here at the DD level, we have now some joint details. And these look pretty normal. Okay, we're going to interrupt every other bar at the control joints. It's a monolithic pour. Wow, okay, that look. Whoa! What's this minimum 48 hours after first placement? And distance between control joints 20. No more than 30 feet apart for construction joints. That's a little different than the assumptions that the concrete contractor and the construction manager had in there. And then they start digging into the specifications, and okay, it's a little bit of a conflict, because on the drawings they said 30 feet, and in the specification it says 33 feet, okay. Maybe that's closer to 10 meters, and they like working in SI units. But anyway, not more than 16 feet between control joints. So, is that a change? Another thing that pops up is, okay, well, you got to leave the forms on until you hit a 50 degree at 36 hours. Maybe that's not so bad. It's May into June. We're good, right? But then, leave forms in place for the full curing period. Okay. Are these a problem? No, they're all reasonable measures to minimize the potential for uncontrolled cracking. Is it a change? It's a change as far as the CM and the construction or the concrete contractor are concerned, based on how they perceive the owner's perceptions. But now they're going to limit the wall pour to 30 feet, control joints to 20 feet. Okay. 48 hours between adjacent wall pours. That's the killer. And I mentioned something about time is money. Think about that. But it actually is a great solution to allow some initial shrinkage to occur in a finite length of wall before you lock it into any adjacent walls, right? I don't know how many people do that, but we see it from time to time from some design professionals because they know it works for the work that they do. Leave the forms on to allow the best curing. It's not a change. It's actually good practice, isn't it? But it's not what they imagined for the fast and cheap solution, right? These are all measures that minimize the potential. So we can get to being at least a little bit pretty, or at least not cracked all over. But there's a cost in time and money. And again, I come back to that triangle of fast, cheap, and pretty, crack control, very environmentally responsible. So, we go from 26 pours to 34. Okay. What does that mean? So now, is this really a change in requirements, but we're going to need to, I just went backwards, I'm sorry. Here we go. So from the AE point of view, it's not a change, because that's what they always thought the owner wanted. But from the CM concrete contractor point of view, it's a change from what they perceived that the owner wanted. So it's a fact. Many design professionals have many different tools in their toolkit for minimizing the potential for uncontrolled cracks. And it's going to vary with experience and time. So, these stipulated prescriptive measures that are in the construction documents, or will be in the construction documents, are really going to extend the wall schedule, and that's going to impact a lot more than just the concrete part of the project. Because now at 34 pours, we're going to have to separate the pours by a day to meet that 48 hours between adjacent pours. we've added pours. We're going to add a few days at the front and back. It's going to stretch us out to 15 weeks. That's a lot of time. And guess what? That takes us from like nice kind of early summer weather into the dog days of August. Does that imply that there's now a requirement for hot weather measures? It's a change from the contractor's point of view. So what can we do to dial that back in? Can we add a second set of forms, add a second crane? That way maybe we can pour every day by hopscotching from area to area. That's going to cost money, and also that would tie up a ton of real estate inside the building pad, which means that no other trades can get in there. The plumber can't get in there. The electrician can't get in there to run duct bank. It's an impact, and it's going to cost time and money. So, things have changed. All of a sudden now, this job site, which would have been a home run, now has 2 cranes, and look at all the litter all over. That's all formwork and reinforcing steel to try to get 2 wall crews going. And now, okay, we're going to hopscotch in between. We're going to pour these straight walls, and then have a second crew come in with another set of formwork to follow behind 2 days later. Okay, that's what it's going to look like. And it's going to tie up a lot more space because now you have that much more equipment. But these are all measures that are acknowledged to work towards minimizing the potential for uncontrolled cracking. But you don't think about these things when a design engineer is in an office preparing a set of documents. So, the translation is fast, cheap, pretty. No cracks in this wall, but a lot of ads there with 5-6 figures. And fast, maybe. Which one rules? So, from the contractor and the concrete contractor and construction manager's point of view, things have certainly changed. Now, let's talk about some potential outcomes. So say the decision is made to proceed with the original concept plan made at the schematic phase, which basically would ignore all the measures that the design professional incorporated into their perception of the project. And just say that the owner is on board with that. Much as Frank Malice is saying, the owner is now educated, and that's a key thing. So here we go. We're going to go ahead and build this. The owner's bought into the approach. May be contrary to what the design professional is recommending. Things have changed from the A&E's point of view. So let's go back to ACI 123R and note that the general contractor, and you heard Frank and Calvin allude to this, the general contractor has the responsibility to construct the project in accordance with the contract documents and with the appropriate standard of care for general contractors in the geographic area of work. This paragraph happens to apply to general contractors, but you can pull that word general out and just call it contractor. So if the features intended for crack control are now omitted or ignored, whichever way you want to call it, in favor of cost and schedule, is a licensed design professional free and clear? I would say yes, because technically the contract documents have changed. Has the owner bought into this approach? That's one of the keys. If the owner hasn't bought into this, is this being done behind his back, then shame on everybody. And if the owner's not informed, let me get back to this. So there's one or two outcomes for it. Just say they plow ahead, 40 feet, strip every day, bang, 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 and there's no cracks. Hallelujah. We are heroes. Nobody's talking about responsibility at that point because there's no uncontrolled cracking to worry about. The requirements of the walls changed, but the outcome was successful. Bang. Everybody's happy. But what if they actually followed the contract documents that the A&E, the licensed design professional, prepared that incorporated delays between pours, much tighter spacing on construction joints, tighter control joints? And there's no cracks, then everybody again is great. But it costs a little more money because you saw that schedule extended, and obviously renting more formwork, 2 cranes. So the team would have applied commonly known effective measures to reduce potential for cracks, and they still appeared. So this is if cracks had actually occurred. So if you go to page 23, paragraph 4, the owner's standard practice when dealing with contractors, which is entirely resident in my head, it notes that it's always the concrete guy's fault. And I think, obviously anybody who's been building in concrete has heard of that statement. So the concrete's going to crack. the measures that everybody applies to control that cracking is good. So say that they plowed ahead with a 40 feet pour every day, strip as soon as you can, and it cracks. Well, you could say that the construction manager and the concrete contractor are therefore responsible because it was their decision to knowingly deviate from the execution that was perceived by the licensed design professional. I'm leaving the word owner out of this. If the change was endorsed by the owner, there may be some responsibility there. But if it was really a construction team going cowboy and ignoring all the provisions that were incorporated by the design professional, then certainly there's responsibility on the contractor's side. So I'm not sure how many people see contractors that knowingly ignore altogether any details or specification provisions or prescriptive requirements intended to attain a reduced potential or limited potential for cracks to occur. If they're doing that, that's their responsibility. On the other hand, another scenario. Just say the construction manager contractor enter a hard bid on those documents, and the bid documents include all that, but they say, Mr. Owner, I can save you a lot of time and a lot of money. Deliver your building 3 months earlier if you let us do what we want to do. The licensed design professional may say, ooh, I don't know about that. But the concrete contractor says, you know what? I know. And I'm going to repair cracks if and when they occur. It's my risk, my responsibility. That's really a good approach. It's a good business approach where there's risk, there's reward. Concrete contractor may make a lot of money if he takes that risk. Because just as the AE has knowledge of measures to limit and control cracking that does occur, the contractor might have a few bullets in his holster there and ready to go. He knows he has a ready-mix supplier that has a pretty good shrinkage characteristics based on testing over a period of years. I'm not certain that one cycle of testing is meaningful in reporting a shrinkage value for a particular concrete mix. I think you need testing over time. I understand there were some questions about that earlier in the presentation, but certainly if you have something that you know that works over and over again and you've successfully built walls pouring 40, 50 feet at a time, you have knowledge that now lets you take risk. And that's an important difference to understand, knowingly taking risk versus being a knucklehead and not knowing anything and taking risk. He's ready to do a superior job with curing. Has a few tricks. He likes to add rustications, maybe because it helps him strip the formwork better. Who knows? Crack inducers, a really cool accessory that really works. And maybe he happens to have, a Connex box full of crack inducers from a job that he bought the materials for that didn't go forward. You don't know that, but he does. And he's flexible enough to adjust measures to respond to changing environmental conditions. Because it's one thing to have typical details and specification language that could be a little draconian, but it gets really draconian when the weather changes. In other words, when you go from hot or not hot and not cold to either hot or cold. Things are changing there. And the contractor has a record of success and tribal knowledge in his entire organization to do this successfully. So it can work. So, this crosses the line in illuminating the difference between performance aspect of a design and prescriptive design. Stipulating, curing, stipulating that where the joints have to be, what configuration they have to be, as Frank Mallitz was saying, that's prescriptive. And that's kind of, you're telling the contractor exactly what to do. Whereas performance is, build me a wall. Build me a wall. And then I don't want to see any cracks, or I don't want to see uncontrolled cracks. I think that's a better term. So the concrete contractor may say, I can do that, it's on me. It's my responsibility. So, here's an example of a wall. I don't have a whole lot of figures, some really cool ones like Oscar had, but I do have walls that, this was built 65 feet long. And rustications, there's a little bit of sand streaking on the front, but it didn't crack. Or if it did, the cracks are hidden in those rustications. Ain't that great? This is an example of two different things happening at the same time. These walls were built, I think, 60 feet at a pop between construction joints. We included control joints. And this was a deviation because the design professional is an engineer with a capital E, and they live and die by their specifications. And they had some rather draconian requirements. We volunteered to go ahead and make some changes, and take on the responsibility. It's our responsibility. But on the other hand, there's form liner wall up here. You can see we're just doing 18 feet at a time. So we ain't stupid. We knew for the parts of the building where the finish wasn't all that important, let's go ahead and rip and run. For where it is important, with a form liner, that, there definitely was concerns about uncontrolled cracking. We're going to do it in a much more conservative manner. And that also illuminates the fact that the owner was totally on board with just letting that run, but he was really particular about the form liner finish. So, what are some other cases where requirements have changed, and how does that affect responsibility? Schedule changes. If walls were to be built in spring or milder weather and they get pushed into summer, or maybe even farther into winter, is a concrete contractor responsible for a schedule? I don't necessarily agree with that unless it's been negotiated and stipulated with the construction manager or the general contractor. But certainly that's something that has to be discussed. And now we're going to talk about communication, because that is even more important than any details. The concrete contractor may be to apply typical and perhaps exotic means to control shrinkage effects, but should that be free? Should he be looking at type K cements or shrinkage reducing admixtures, SRAs? Stuff ain't free. Typical measures in the summer, chilling water, cooled aggregates may not be sufficient for some types of construction. If nobody's going to pay for exotic measures, the risk is increased that things aren't going to turn out exactly the way everybody wanted. Who's responsible? And cold weather, again, there's a risk for cracking after the protection period, and this is one of our jobs where protection was not continued sufficiently enough. That black line, you can see how the temperature just plummeted after the forms were removed and the protection was removed, and we got some weird cracking. That's what can happen. So when requirements change, risk must be examined. It has to be assessed. And with regard to concrete cracking, there's changes in execution requirements may serve to increase or decrease the risk. It depends which direction things are flowing, whether it's coming from the contractor wildcatting or the contractor making suggestions with a benefit to other people. Certainly that needs to be discussed. And when all parties clearly understand that the potential may be changed, either increased or decreased, by changing execution requirements, maybe we can be consistent with mutually agreed upon expectations. And this gets back to communication that you heard Calvin and Frank talk about. No one's really responsible if you're all on the same page about what might happen and how we are going to deal with it. And when requirements are changed or ignored without communication, well, that's when there's going to be discussions about responsibility. Then you get into the oak paneled room that Frank Mallitz is talking about. Things are going to get nasty. If you think back to the triangle, you can have two of the three, and you need to be discussing with those two. Communication is the key. Again, you've heard it again and again and again. Align expectations, then the responsibility can be appropriately allocated. Because in every endeavor, there's risk, and with risk comes responsibility. And it's the people that are taking the risk that then have to assume the responsibility. If the owner decides to roll the dice and say, go ahead, pour me 60 feet of wall a day, I don't care about cracks, that means the owner has accepted the risk of that cracking occurring, or at least uncontrolled cracking occurring. So making sure that any change that's made to requirements needs to be assessed, because that's going to identify who's responsible. Within the 132 report, there's another great comment. Section 6.6 discusses a pre-construction meeting. The general contractor should schedule, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I disagree with that, and I'm on the committee. I think it requires a lot of meetings. It can't just be one meeting. In fact, you should be meeting long before construction is even scheduled to start to begin to discuss expectations, try to get everybody on the same page, because that's the only way you're going to have success when it comes to cracking. And it's especially it's important. If a requirement changes, man, you better meet again and make sure everybody understands the ramifications of a change, whether it be a change in schedule, change in methodology, change in execution. And again, requirements can change, pardon me, due to design changes. Hey, they want to add another floor to the building, or they want to add another 400 feet of wall. Great. Value engineering. I think there should be something written up somewhere about the whole concept of value engineering involves you want to reduce the cost of this project or you want to take time out of the schedule, there is an effect. There's going to be a change. There's going to be some reallocation of risk. Weather, holy cow. Schedule acceleration. It has become really obvious. Supply chain issues, I think those are beginning to sort themselves out. 2 years ago, I think we had a hard time getting some materials that did have an impact on projects. And I'm specifically talking about crack inducers, which is why we wound up with a Connex box full of them. And when quality issues are identified that are inconsistent with those expectations, and you heard Frank talking about when is a crack really important to deal with. So just for fun to close out, Frank mentioned a type of crack that I don't think it's really difficult to determine who's responsible for. This is a restraint crack in a post-tension building. It's ugly as hell. And that one had been fixed 5 times. And they could never resolve it. Every time they fixed it, it would re-crack. Because the building was continually, over a 5-year period, shortening and pulling away from that floor column. Is that the contractor's fault? I don't think so. But we'll leave that open for debate.